I almost spat out my coffee this morning when I saw a tweet claiming that XRP is running out. It sounded absurd until I dug deeper and found something that left me utterly speechless. Now, I've been holding XRP since 2020. I've ridden the roller coaster through the lawsuits, the price crashes, you name it. Now, I thought that I had seen it all with this coin, but here's the thing. Just when I was getting comfortable, thinking that I knew every twist in the XRP saga, a new rumor smacked me in the face. A rumor that XRP's supply, the amount actually up for grabs, might be way smaller than anyone else realized. And if that is true, that it changes everything. So, naturally, I had to investigate this. You know that feeling that you have when you stumble on something at 2 a.m. and suddenly you're deep in the rabbit hole. Well, that was me last night. I even hopped into our free educational Discord. There's a link in the description, by the way. And I had to just double check, to sanity check, in fact, what I was actually finding, and at least with some fellow crypto night owls like myself. And let me tell you, the story that unfolded had me pacing my kitchen at midnight. Now, if you hold XRP, or even if you don't, but you're just crypto curious, you're going to want to stick around for this because I'm going to share the wild journey that I went on to track down this missing XRP mystery. So by the end, we might just see XRP in a whole new light. All right, let me jump into this story, and don't worry, no boring lectures here, just a personal little tale. So, it all started with this pundit in the XRP community. It goes by the nickname of 𝗗𝗶𝘀𝗰𝗋. I kid you not. Now, I'm scrolling through X, you know, the bird app that's now an X symbol, right? Whatever Elon wants to call it these days. And 𝗗𝗶𝘀𝗰𝗋 is basically shouting from the rooftops that people have no idea just how little XRP is actually left out there for the taking. Now, I'm thinking, come on. How can XRP be scarce? There's 100 billion of them. How could we possibly run out? But then he lays out this claim. Almost half of all of the XRP is already spoken for, locked up by Ripple, the company, its founders, and a few very early big investors or big players. Now, half the pie, it's off the table. So I blink and I kind of reread that. And if that is true, then it means that us regular people are actually all just scrambling over the other half then. And he implies that that half isn't even coming back to the market anytime soon, because those big holders are clinging on to their XRP like it's gold. Now, at first, I'm skeptical, right? Back in 2017, everyone said the XRP has a huge supply and it could never go super high in price because of the big supply. And I kind of, I guess internalized that. 100 billion tokens kind of felt like an endless sea. Plenty for everyone, right? But here's the thing. 𝗗𝗶𝘀𝗰𝗋 basically is saying, think again, because retail holders like you and me are only actually holding scraps of XRP. The real whales haven't even started feasting yet. So scraps, whales, this sounded a bit dramatic, right? So I was half convinced that he was exaggerating just to kind of hype up the XRP community. But my curiosity was of course piqued here. So what if he's actually onto something? Could XRP actually be a hell of a lot more scarce than we realized, right? It's like being at a pizza party thinking that there are 8 slices for you and your friends, then finding out that 4 slices were actually taken before you even got there. You and your buddies are actually then fighting over the remaining slices. Kind of changes the whole vibe, doesn't it? So I needed to know more, so I started digging further, looking for the numbers. You can cue another community sloth then, someone with a handle of 24 hours crypto. Now this guy had already kind of crunched some numbers and his analysis was floating around, conveniently backing up what 𝗗𝗶𝘀𝗰𝗋 was actually saying. Perfect. So let's bring on the data. So, according to this analysis, Ripple, that's the company, has a gigantic stash locked up in escrow. This is around about 35.3 billion XRP. And yes, that was billion with a B. So that's roughly 35% of the entire supply just sitting in escrow vaults. Now, that escrow is kind of like a whole bunch of time-locked piggy banks that Ripple unlocks slowly over time. So it's not going to flood the market all at once. But for now, those coins are effectively off of the market. Now, on top of that, Ripple, the company, apparently still holds about 3.5 billion XRP outright in their own wallets, not counting that escrow. Then we have the founders. Now, I've heard tales of how much XRP the early guys got, and sure enough, Chris Larsen, one of Ripple's co-founders, is said to have around 2.3 billion XRP to his name. And another early founder, that's 𝗗𝗶𝘀𝗰𝗱, has about 1.3 billion. Now, these are pretty huge bags, and let's be real, these folks are the OG true believers. You bet that they're not selling that stash on some random Tuesday. So, I do some quick math, or mental math anyway. 35.3 plus 3.5 plus 2.3 plus 1.3, that's over 42 billion XRP effectively off the market in very strong hands. Over 40% of the supply accounted for right there, sitting tight. So let that sink in. 40% of XRP not really trading out in the wild. Now, those numbers might not be exact to the decimal, but even, in ballpark kind of figures, it's kind of eye-opening, right? Now, if all of that is untouchable supply, what does it actually leave for the rest of us then? Maybe around 60% of the supply theoretically. But wait, 24 Hours Crypto made another point. Institutions have started nibbling at the XRP stash too. Now, he pointed out that some institutions have already quietly scooped up slices, where there's a Canadian fund, Purpose Investments, with an XRP ETF that holds about 29.6 million XRP. There's another asset manager called 3IQ, which holds around 45 million XRP. Now, 45 million or 29 million might sound like peanuts when we're throwing around billions, right? But let's think of it like the early birds from the big fish pond, right? Now, these are relatively small firms compared to, let's say, JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs. Now, if even these guys took positions, well, what happens to the really, at least that's what happens when the really kind of big players come knocking at the door for XRP? Now, at this point, my jaw is starting to drop a bit. Not gonna lie, Ripple Van Winkle's rant suddenly actually has data points to back it all up. Then comes the kicker, the estimate that retail investors, that's people like you and me, the everyday traders and the hodlers, might actually only control something like 15% of the entire XRP supply. Yeah, 15%, that's it. So out of 100 billion XRP, we retail folks collectively might only have about 15 billion. The rest is in those escrows with founders, maybe in early institutional bags, etc. If this is all true, then dang, right? We really are fighting over the scraps, right? It's kind of like we're the kids, at least at the kids' table, picking at the leftovers while the adults have the main course stashed away for later. Now, ever kind of been at a family dinner where you realize the best dishes kind of got mostly reserved for the elders, right? Kind of like that. And here's a thought that kind of gave me goosebumps. If retail truly has only 15%, then most of the XRP that will ever kind of circulate among regular people is already kind of in our hands right now. In other words, if a new wave of buyers show up, especially big institutional buyers, there isn't much float left for them to actually buy without taking pieces or prices on a serious kind of uphill battle. All right, it's probably time to take a bit of a breather here because at this point, I'm practically buzzing with equal parts excitement and anxiety. What do all of these numbers scream? Well, it's supply squeeze. So let's think about it. Supply is limited and possibly shrinking, which I'll get to in a second. The demand, these could be about to go crazy. Classic Econ 101. So if demand does shoot up and supply can't keep up, well, the only thing that gives is, of course, the price. It goes up, sometimes violently. Now, I'm not here to kind of make wild predictions, right? I've seen enough crazy $500 XRP or $1,000 XRP price predictions on the internet, and I usually just roll my eyes. But I have to admit, this whole scarcity angle got me wondering, could those wild predictions actually have a grain of truth if this scenario plays out? I mean, I used to think of a kind of $10 to $50 XRP was a bit of a fantasy at times. Maybe it still is, I don't know. But if suddenly big institutions do want in, and they're kind of fighting over that 15% slither, well, that we all hold, honestly, all bets are off here. And guess what? The timing of all of this is kind of like the chef's kiss. Interesting, right? And this is because the XRP community, myself included, is buzzing about what we might see next. These spot XRP ETFs, which are coming as soon as potentially next month. And yes, the actual exchange traded funds, not the hybrid stuff, but the actual spot versions that hold XRP could launch. Now, for context here, in the crypto world, a spot ETF can open the floodgates of demand because it makes it easier for big money to invest in an asset legally and securely through regular stock markets. So here I am thinking, if October rolls around and suddenly some trillion-dollar asset managers can start offering XRP investments to their clients, while firms like JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, just to name a few heavy hitters, could finally jump into XRP in a big way. Now, they've probably been sitting on the sidelines watching the whole SEC saga get resolved. Now, those guys move. They don't just nibble, right? They'll actually be taking rather large and big bites. So, picture a few whales draining a small pond, right? If XRP's available supply is a pond that's already half dry, one or two big whales could empty it out real quick, right? They buy millions or billions, and then poof, those XRP are yanked off of the exchanges into cold storage, not to be seen again for who knows how long. Now, that scenario would mean one thing. The price would have to adjust, and it would have to do it fast. How fast? Well, Ripple Van Winkle said something like the adjustment will be sharp and fast, right? And the whales finally making their moves, right? At least when they do. Now, it's kind of like the quiet before a storm then, right? Right now, at around, I don't know, $2.90 or whatever it is, per XRP, give or take. That's kind of when I last checked anyway. It might feel like this is some kind of stable range, right? But according to these pundits on X anyway, this isn't even the real move. The price discovery hasn't even truly started yet. It's kind of like we're in the pre-game warm-up, not the actual game. Now, this is speculation, of course, but it kind of makes my adrenaline spike because if it's even partially true, the next year could get really interesting for the XRP holders. So by now, I was pretty convinced something was up with the supply. But being the kind of curious cat that I am, I wanted more concrete signs, like can we see evidence that XRP is actually getting scarce in real time? Enter the exchange reserves. Now, I came across many reports, and one that came across that was really interesting was all about Coinbase's XRP holdings that nearly blew my mind. I've done 2 videos about this specifically, but we're just going to do a recap here for anyone who's new. Now, Coinbase is one of the largest crypto exchanges in the United States, and apparently has a huge stash of XRP in their cold wallets, basically their offline storage for crypto, kind of like a bank's vault. Now, in June of this year, Coinbase had 52 different XRP cold wallets, holding a total of 970 million XRP. Yeah, nearly a billion XRP was just sitting in Coinbase's reserves. Fast forward to September 20th, and guess how many XRP wallets Coinbase holds now? 2. Just 2 wallets, right, holding only 32 million XRP combined. So we went from 970 million XRP down to 32 million XRP. That is a 97% drop in their reserve stash in just a matter of a few months. And as if that wasn't wild enough, I also checked the latest data from an XRP Ledger Explorer, and it shows that Coinbase emptied those last 2 wallets as well. So effectively, Coinbase's known cold wallets are at 0 XRP now. So when I read that, I actually said out loud, there's just no way. Where did it all go? Maybe people withdrew en masse after XRP's legal victory, right? When XRP relisted, a lot of holders might have moved their coins to private wallets or other kind of platforms. Or maybe Coinbase just reshuffled funds around internally in ways that we can't track. There's no official word from Coinbase, so we're all left to just guess. But one thing's, or at least one likely meaning here, is that a lot of XRP left the exchanges, right? Coinbase in particular, and is now sitting in private hands, possibly in cold storage or being put to use elsewhere. So in plain speak here, there's less XRP available on exchanges for newcomers to actually buy. Now take this is exactly kind of what you would expect to see before a supply crunch. The liquid supply on exchanges dries up. And if you've been around crypto, you know that when coins flow out of exchanges, it often signals holders locking them away, which is usually bullish because it means people aren't looking to sell anytime soon. So with XRP, given everything else that we've talked about today, it's kind of like it's another puzzle piece clicking into place. Now, at this point, I'm texting my friends, who's also into XRP. I'm like, dude, Coinbase is basically out of XRP. What the heck, right? We had one of those should we be buying more now before it is too late moments. Now, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your money. Serious disclaimer, I should say, is incoming in just a second for that one. But I'd like to kind of reiterate that, because I would be lying if I said that I hadn't thought, at least the thought hadn't crossed my own mind, right? But I wouldn't suggest anyone do that. Anyway, on speaking of buying, this is probably a good time to actually mention something important, as I do use a couple of different cryptocurrency exchanges, and I'm always trying new ones to see where I get the best experience or the best rates. Now, lately I've been checking out 𝗗𝗀𝘀, a crypto exchange, and BitGet, another exchange for trading XRP and other coins. Full disclosure though, I do have affiliate links for those in the description, meaning that if you do use them, it supports the channel here at no extra cost to yourself. But honestly, affiliate or not, it's smart to have accounts on a few or as many different exchanges as you possibly can, just in case one runs low or has issues when you need it the most. So after seeing the Coinbase situation, I was pretty glad that I had some backup options, right? So yeah, if you want to explore 𝗗𝗀𝘀 or BitGet, feel free to use my links in the description, totally up to you. Always do what is right for you, and you must do your own research as well. All right, that reminds me, let's take a quick pit stop here for a necessary disclaimer, because this video is getting at least into some pretty hype territory, and I want to make sure to keep it 100% real with you guys. Now, this might just shock you, but I'm not a financial advisor, and nothing in this video is financial advice. Cryptocurrencies are highly volatile, and you could lose all of the money that you invest. You should always do your own research and consult a qualified professional. After all, your investments are entirely your responsibility, and you should know that nothing is ever guaranteed when it comes to investing. Neither I, this channel, nor YouTube are liable for any losses, and this video is for entertainment and educational purposes only. All right, now that we've kind of got that out of the way, hopefully you're still with me here, let's go back to the good stuff, because believe me, at least believe it or not, I should say, there is actually more to this story. So far, we've looked into big holders hoarding XRP and exchange reserves dwindling down. But there is another piece to this puzzle. New crypto projects that are designed to lock up XRP on purpose. Now, if you're into the crypto scene, you might have heard of wrapped tokens or DeFi yield farming. Well, XRP is getting a taste of that too. There are two projects that have popped up recently. One by a cross-chain protocol called 𝗗𝗶𝘀𝗰𝗍. I'm probably murdering the name, I apologize. But anyway, this introduced something called mXRP, and another one by Flare Network, which you probably know from years ago, when they also airdropped some FLR tokens to XRP holders way back. And they actually launched something called FXRP. Now, I won't go into the super technicals here, but just trust me, my eyes did glaze over with too much of the DeFi jargon too, right? But here's the gist of it. mXRP and FXRP are like mirrors or wrapped versions of the XRP that you can use on other networks in smart contracts. To create those, you kind of have to lock up your real XRP, and in return, you get this new token. It's kind of like you put your XRP in a vault and you get a shiny new MXRP token on another blockchain, which you can then use in fancy DeFi applications. The same with FXRP on the Flare network. You lock one real XRP, you get one FXRP on Flare, and you can go and play with in DeFi world. Now, you're probably thinking, why on earth does all this matter? Well, it's because the real XRP that gets locked up as collateral for MXRP or FXRP are taken out of the circulating supply, or at least for a while, right? They're not available to trade or to sell until someone unlocks them by returning the wrapped tokens. It's kind of like taking more chairs away in the musical chairs game. And get this, the moment that Flare launched FXRP, they set a weekly cap as a test. They only allow 5 million XRP to be locked in the first week, and guess how fast that cap got hit? It was about 4 hours, boom. 5 million XRP got gobbled up and locked on FXRP just like that. So the demand was so high that Flare team basically went, all right, we'll raise the cap next week. People are eager to stake or to use XRP in these new ways. Meanwhile, the goal with MXRP is even more ambitious. They eventually actually at least want to kind of lock up 5% of XRP's supply to support their cross-chain network features, basically making XRP usable across different blockchains. And Flare's long-term aim for FXRP is around 5 billion XRP locked, which is about 8% of the total supply, right? Combine these two goals and you potentially end up at 13% of all of the XRP that could end up locked away in these protocol vaults. 13%, on top of the 40+% that we already know is being taken away and spoken for by Ripple and the larger early gang. Now, are you keeping track here? Because at this point, my mind is doing a few backflips trying to imagine what's actually left if all of these things do come together. Now, I'm going to level with you guys. When I first heard about these projects, I thought, that's cool, more utility for XRP. I didn't immediately realize that it meant sucking up more XRP out of the open market. But now the picture is kind of coming together. Two big holders, institutional kind of nibbling, exchange supply draining, and now DeFi locks for FXRP and MXRP. The theme is pretty consistent, isn't it? It's a shrinking available supply. It's kind of like everyone is tucking XRP away under their mattresses, or at least in smart contract vaults, and throwing away the key for the foreseeable future. I joke that someday soon, the only XRP actually changing hands will be like the 10 guys on the exchange passing the same 100 coins around, while everyone else is just holding tight. I might be exaggerating, but you kind of get the point, right? So here I am, after digesting all of this information, just kind of sitting here at my desk, letting it all sink in. Now, I've held XRP for 5 years now, through some real ups and some downs. I've held through the scary SEC lawsuit, when XRP got delisted and then relisted on major exchanges. I held XRP when it hovered at 20 cents. Seemingly forever. I held it when it spiked to $1, then crashed again, and then climbed past $2 and so on. So you could say that I'm pretty battle hardened with this particular token. Yet, this whole supply shock revelation kind of felt like a whole new chapter entirely. I was excited because, hey, who doesn't like the idea of something that you own might be more valuable than you actually thought? But then a little bit uneasy because if XRP truly becomes scarce and does shoot up, well, the stakes get even higher and the roller coaster gets even wilder. Suddenly, I'm picturing scenarios like, what if a major bank announces a huge XRP purchase next month? The price could rocket. But then what? Right? We might see crazy volatility, maybe even exchanges struggling to even handle the demand. It's the kind of thing that could either validate my years of diamond handing or turn into a mother of all buy the rumor, sell the news events. So late last night, I actually kind of found myself pacing around the living room, totally kind of the meme of Charlie Day with the conspiracy board, red strings connecting pins on chalkboard, right? At least corkboard, not chalkboard. I had tabs open on my XRP scan charts, Twitter threads, even old Ripple quarterly reports. I went pretty deep, y'all. Right? My girlfriend walked by and just gave me that, "You okay? Look, I just said, I'm researching something important. And she just wisely nodded and backed out of the room, right? She's used to my crypto rabbit holes by now. And then at some point in this kind of wee hours of the morning, I felt this wave of clarity. It hit me. Maybe, just maybe, all of these years of holding XRP might pay off in a way that I just hadn't and maybe didn't even anticipate, right? Not just from the legal victories or the big partnership announcements like we usually kind of expect, but from the plain old supply and demand doing its good old thing. The idea that XRP could become genuinely scarce, like a rare collectible, because of all of these factors kind of converging together, it was a bit of a mind-blowing moment. Now, don't get it twisted here. I'm not saying that this is definitely going to happen, or that you should go out there and bet the farm on XRP, right? Please, for the love of God, for the love of all crypto, do not mortgage your house to buy XRP or do something stupid like that. Definitely not. I'm just a guy on the internet sharing a personal aha moment as an XRP holder, and I realized that I had probably underestimated this whole aspect of this particular investment. Right? We always talk about XRP's utility, its transaction speeds, its partnerships, and yada yada. But maybe the most dramatic plot twist will come from something as simple as there's just not much XRP out there, at least not as much as we all thought. Ultimately, as the sun started to rise, yes, I was up that late, I sat down to kind of sum up all of my thoughts into a journal. And okay, it was a crypto forum post, but let's call it a journal for my ego's sake, right? Here's where I landed. XRP might be on the cusp of a supply crunch, a perfect storm where a bunch of different factors, big holders, institutions, exchanges, DeFi projects, all come together and cut down the liquid supply big time. If and when demand does kick up, and it kind of feels like demand is kicking up lately, it could be the lightning, at least like lighting a match in a room full of fireworks. The price reaction could be rather explosive. Now, of course, nothing in crypto is guaranteed. Maybe these fears are overblown. Maybe Ripple will release more escrow faster than expected, or those ETFs get delayed, or banks move slower than we think. It's possible that the supply shock theory stays just a theory for a while longer, and we did see XRP's price jump to around $3.66 this year without anything crazy happening at all. So perhaps a lot of this is already priced in. Who knows? But I'll tell you what, I'm personally more confident in my decision to hold XRP now than I was before I read that fateful tweet. All of the research reinforced that I'm not crazy for hanging on to this coin. In fact, it made me feel like I'm a part of some exclusive early club that got in before the floodgates potentially even opened, and like kind of snagging maybe a ticket to a secret show before it even sold out. Now, I'm also more vigilant now. I'm watching those metrics, the exchange reserves, new projects like FXRP, any hints of institutional buying, like a hawk. I've got our Discord community. You bet that I shared all of this in the Discord, keeping me sane and grounded too, so I don't spiral into hopium without thinking it through properly. And by the way, if you're not in the Discord, you should come and join us. It's completely free. The link's in the description. We share the research, the news, the memes, the works. And honestly, right, it saved me my sanity more than once during these crazy crypto adventures. So, this whole journey started with a random tweet that seemed too sensational to be true. But by chasing it down, I ended up learning a whole ton about what's actually happening behind the scenes with XRP. And it reminded me why I got into crypto in the first place. This is the thrill of discovery, the community coming together, the sense that we're early to something rather big. Now, whether or not XRP's price moons because of a supply crunch, I'm here for the ride. And if you're with me, holding a bag of XRP or just enjoying all of the drama, then buckle up, because it's never boring, that much is for sure. And so, if you've enjoyed coming down this rabbit hole with me, you can do me a favor. Smash that like button, hit the subscribe button, and join me on the next crypto adventure. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss what happens next.